Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Today's special guest is Mel Koppelman. She is a health detective, an acupuncturist, educator, writer, blogger, and researcher, and she also happens to practice functional medicine. So I got to sit down with her and just pick her brain about certain different things on research and her observations in acupuncture, about convincing acupuncturists how acupuncture works, and the science behind what we do. She's also a big advocate. She's kind of like the hero of the against those big science groups that are always posting things against the evidence for acupuncture. We also talked about how to explain acupuncture to regular people. I asked her about quality research from Asia, and we discussed the topic of publication bias. And I asked her how close we are to becoming mainstream medicine. And just toward the end, I asked her, oh, what's the best way to get GPs to refer? So here is my conversation with Mel Koppelman. Yeah, do you think you could talk about a little bit about what you do or what your background is, how you came about getting into acupuncture, Mel?
Sure, and thank you so much for having me and giving me the opportunity to talk about a geeky passion of mine. Let's see, my background. Well, I'll start by just saying that my mom is a retired endocrinologist and also a medical researcher. And so when I was very small, I did think I was going to become a doctor. And my father was a lawyer, so I think I grew up arguing and with a lot of skepticism in our household from both sides. And by the time I got to university, I knew I didn't want to go into conventional medicine for the reasons that I still feel that I didn't think I would enjoy it. I thought that the system would be challenging because I saw that with my mom. And so fast forward, I got an unrelated degree, but I always really liked science. And then after university, I went to India to volunteer for 6 months. And while I was there, I got very, very ill. So I got an infection and they couldn't figure out what it was. And I was poorly. And I ended up being chronically ill for about 2 years after my trip to India. And so it was basically, a situation, and I think it's a fairly common story where the conventional system was unable to help me and was very unhelpful. And it was simply a matter of doing my own research and finding out things that worked for me. So I found an excellent practitioner, acupuncturist and herbalist who helped me a lot. And I did so much research on diet and nutrition because my digestion was broken, so I had to rehabilitate it. So I was able to overcome the infection and rehabilitate myself to the point now that I'm healthier now than I was when I was a kid. But that was sort of my journey. So now I love acupuncture, I love nutrition and functional medicine, and I love communicating about them and what they have to offer.
Oh. How did you get into functional medicine?
Well, functional medicine is really exciting to me because while I love the models that I learned of Chinese medicine, I think they're enormously helpful and I think they're enormously elegant. But there's this frustration about being able to interface that with the biochemistry side of things, which I also like. I mean, that's also going on too. We can talk about Zhang Fu and Qi and channels, but we do have molecules in our blood. And so, as I was going through my acupuncture training, I would always think, oh, I wonder what that corresponds to physiologically. Not in a this equals that 1-to-1, but just I wonder what that goes with that too. And so, once I started practicing acupuncture, I realized that there was a lot of that most of my patients, one of the main underlying causes of their problems was nutrition and diet. So it's a lot of chronic stuff, and I wanted to learn more about how I could help them that way. Functional medicine, I always describe as like if Chinese medicine and biomedicine had a love child, and then that's what it would be, because it's like that. It's the same way of seeing our patients about the interactions of what's going on in their life, what's going on emotionally, what's going on spiritually, and having the biochemistry as well. Not saying that that's more important, but just saying that that's there, and we can actually interpret this differently than biomedicine in a way that's extremely helpful. So I got into that trying to help myself, and then I was using it with my patients and researching, and then now I've done a lot of training in that area, and I think it's something that for practitioners who are who are excited by that sort of thing. It's like a really natural thing to use in your practice.
So you're really known for your research. Like, where does your passion for research come from? Because most actors I know, like we see research, we kind of like run for the hills. They're like, I just treat, and then I know it works. But for you, you're like so passionate about fighting these nice guidelines and these protocols that you're kind of like and you're just how do you where does that passion come from?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, and I should say, like, I actually, I'm not really doing research. I'm reading and writing about research, which I suppose technically is its own kind of research, but not the type that people think. Like, I'm not wearing the lab coat with my test tubes. But I think the motivation really comes more from like this argumentation and communication and telling a more helpful story about what we do. So, what I was observing, and this, I'm sure there's more than one side to it, but what I was observing was that that you had the very vocal medical skeptics who were using the language of scientific research to say acupuncture is totally BS. This is quackery. This is stupid, guys. And here's why. And then if you were sort of Joe Public going, oh, really? I heard it was kind of cool. Is there anything to this? And you look, and there's them saying it's all in your head. And then if you try to look for the other side, there's not much there that's well communicated using that language. So it's really a lot, we balance chi in our meridians. And if you're, if you don't know anything about this, it's what they are saying is very convincing. And what I picked up on was that what they were saying was a total misrepresentation of the literature. That they were really cherry picking, distorting. They're really abusing science by making the arguments in the way they're making them. And so I actually kind of thought it'd be fun to challenge them. So it's and for me, the most important thing isn't convincing them. I don't actually think that I can convince them that acupuncture works because it's really more about their beliefs, and so they're holding on to the belief and just distorting whatever information comes in to be consistent with that. But it's about convincing the public and offering a counterpoint. But most importantly, it's about convincing acupuncturists, because acupuncturists know that they help their patients. But I'm under the impression that that a lot of them feel like that the research doesn't support what they do, and I think that that's a problem for our profession, and I don't think that's accurate. So I think that's what motivates me, is to get the message out to the practitioners that it's not that you need the approval of science or that you need anyone's permission, but you should know when you get up in the morning and go to clinic that there's a huge scientific basis for what you do, and you don't need to obsess about it and talk about it, but you show up differently when you know that.
Yeah, it's such a. I always feel like it's David and Goliath. Like, you're always doing this underdog medicine, and I think when I first graduated, I was like, oh, I know it works, but where's the science behind it? And that's always, it is, like you said, it's a voice in my head like, all right, you know what you do works, but where's the science behind it? It's always a question. And I feel like, so, and you mentioned these groups, there's so many doctors and skeptics out there. They have quackwatch.com, and they've got like Friends of Science and things. How do you stay motivated and positive to keep going and keep going when there's things like that? Like, how do you, like, what motivates you?
Well, to be honest, I kind of enjoy it because it's a bit of a game, really. And I started doing this just. I started writing. I wrote a blog post that I addressed to science-based medicine a few years ago now, and they actually responded. But once I started doing it, I actually discovered that what we were doing has like a very long history in human civilization, and it's called rhetoric. And there's some really cool things written about it, and it really is the art and science of persuasion and belief and understanding, and it's like it's its own mental martial art. So it's kind of fun, and so I think for me, what's important is that when I'm doing it, I'm kind of having an inward smile, and I'm laughing, and I'm enjoying it. And sometimes I am getting pissed off with what they're saying, and I know that that's like a little barometer. Like, Mel, you're taking it too seriously, because it is, it's a game. And as long as I can keep it like that, I can be quite effective. And when I get, ranty and indignant and superior, then my effectiveness really slips. So that it's a kind of a nice mental outlet. And I feel I do feel while I'm sat at the typewriter, yeah, as if at my laptop, that at the end of the day, my bias and my assumption is that most of the time acupuncture is going to be better than what they're recommending, and that actually these words can literally save lives, and that comes from the research, and so that's a huge motivation.
Yeah, it's really inspiring what you do, because I just read on things that you write and post like, oh, there's new evidence here, it's exciting and things like that. I mean, have you ever had a situation where you actually managed to logically convert someone, or not convert, but convince someone, hey, acupuncture does work, whereas when they first started, they were like, no, this is just crap, rubbish?
A couple of times, I would say. As I said, that's not usually my intention, because if you're it's important. It's important for us to remember, like, if you're speaking to someone who is not open to having their belief change, it's not they're not lacking information. We kind of think, oh, if only they knew what I knew, they would think what I think. It's like, no, that's not how it works most of the time. But I do, I have seen, like, in my conversations with Edzard Ernst, who's based over in the UK, not that I can necessarily convince him that acupuncture works, but the stuff that he's saying now is different. So I've gotten some of the skeptics to have to change what they're saying, because nobody was challenging them, and they were saying things that just couldn't fly. So I went, wait a minute. So now they've had to upgrade it, which is helpful. So they're now saying, oh, well, it only works for pain. It's like, it only works for pain. Like, that sounds kind of helpful.
Yeah.
An effective treatment for pain. That's kind of useful, don't you think? So getting them a little bit backed into a corner. And let's see. And there was actually, it was interesting on science-based medicine, after the post, the long chain of comments, and some of them are very silly in this, but I actually did see that one skeptic reader had been converted by a specific study design. And that was very useful for me, because now I know to emphasize that. And it was when there was a study that came out about the role of something called adenosine in acupuncture's effects. And the study design was on mice, and they used a very specific design where they had two groups of mice, and one was bred to not have a receptor for adenosine, and the other group was bred to have a receptor for adenosine. And the acupuncture analgesia didn't work in the mice that didn't have the receptor. And so this guy was like, well, that's somewhat convincing. You know what I mean? It's like, well, yeah, it should be. We're not talking about magic spirits and forces.
Right.
Like, this is hard science. And so so now that's where, when you can get into the nitty gritty, when you can talk about study designs that are so visual and so clear cut, then yeah, there's like slowly you make progress. Yeah.
You're kind of making me get excited about that now. So say for the average practitioner, when a person comes in, what would you say is the most simplest explanation of how acupuncture works scientifically, from a layperson's point of view? Like, how would you break it down to like a patient or a potential patient?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I do modify how I explain it depending on who I'm speaking with, and also when I'm with the patient, because my patients aren't skeptics; they haven't come in to bust my chops, and so they're curious how it's working, and often they're asking after the first treatment when they've got some improvement, like, whoa, wait, how does it work? In my communication with patients, I'm always trying to maximize, ironically, the placebo effect. So I'm always trying to use words and word pictures that are going to promote healing. So for a lot of patients, if they want to just know how does it work, I talk a little bit about nerves and the nervous system. I talk about how acupuncture has been shown to balance the, we have the fight or flight nervous system and the rest and digest and healing nervous system, which most are familiar with, and if they're not, they can understand. And I can say that acupuncture is really good at resetting it so that we can go out of that stressed part and into the nice relaxed part. And so that's both true and heavily scientifically validated, and also a really useful image for them to be, so we can enhance that effect. I also like to talk about acupuncture. The technical terms is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, which is not the term I use with my patients, but I'll say it's really good at resetting the part of the brain that is balancing all the hormones in the body. So it's balancing the stress hormones and the sex hormones, and it's just really, the needling talks to that part and it rebalances it really clearly, which is why you're seeing the improvements that you're seeing. So, so these are really nice. Very rarely do I get to bust out my properly nerdy stuff.
Did you feel tempted when someone really asked you?
Oh, I love it. I mean, because most patients when they ask how it works, so it's partly curiosity and it's partly reassurance. If
Yeah.
people are telling them that they're silly and that they're gullible, then they want to be reassured that they're in good hands. And so if you can
Right.
give them anything concrete, that's enough, especially if you
Yeah.
have rapport.
Yeah.
And then if you get some, for me, it's like a fellow nerd in here, like great, let's talk.
Yeah. Let's get down. Yeah. I've just I completely agree. Where you don't want to overwhelm them with big, huge words, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, but I think you're right. They just want to be reassured that they're in good hands, and they want a simple explanation of why the treatment is working. Actually, I always out of my own curiosity, I always wondered why distal points work. I mean, because logically I can figure out why. Okay, if you do local points, okay, that's cool because you're stimulating local blood flow, things are happening. But how in your view, like how does a distal point work? Say on the scalp or on the hands or on the feet. Like what is your take on that?
Sure. I've got two sort of different answers for that. So I'll press you by saying that in terms of the acupuncture research, there's the research that's done using the current models of how a human functions. So we can talk about individual molecules and nerves, and so we're using the current understanding and we're explaining things that way. But there is amazing research going on right now that's giving us totally new and different ideas about how the human body works that are not encompassed in the current medical model. And those are so consistent with how we work with the body. And so I think in the fullness of time, those are the models that we're going to want to use because they're the best fit. But I don't think it's helpful to bring those out too early because now again, you sound crackers. Now instead of talking about chi, you're talking about biophysics and
Things that don't exist.
it's people that things that are not mainstream yet. So in terms of distal needling, one thing we can say is that researchers have done a really excellent job of demonstrating that there are these nerve reflexes that go from distal points, let's say, to the visceral organs. So there's a Japanese researcher, I think his name is Takano, and he's done loads of stuff on mice volunteers who he can map out that stomach 36 is changing the blood flow to the digestive organs. So there is a physical reflex there that they can pin, and no pun intended, they can pin it down because they can block different parts of that pathway going to the spinal cord and see exactly where things happen and don't happen. So we can accurately say that's been demonstrated that that the points from the arms, hands, feet, legs communicate inwards in a way that's consistent with what we do. But I also would say that we are on the brink, I think, of a somewhat big change in our understanding of how human physiology works, which again is just super consistent with what our medicine's been saying all along, and having to do with the organization of a body in three-dimensional space. So to kind of break that down a little bit, and hopefully this isn't too technical, conventional medicine, mostly chronic care, is mostly based on biochemistry. Apart from surgery and other areas, when we're talking about pharmaceuticals, we're talking about biochemistry. And the main central idea of biochemistry is that DNA codes for RNA and RNA codes for protein. So that one sentence covers up the whole shebang of biochemistry. And that is accurate and that is helpful, but it is incorrect. Sorry, it's not incorrect, it's incomplete. It's incomplete. And what it's missing is that you have the DNA in every cell, which is the whole recipe book for how to make all of your proteins. So it's like if you want to look up how to make this protein, you just go to the right page and boom, here's your IKEA instructions for assembling that. But what the DNA does not tell you how to do is how to assemble organs and bodies in three-dimensional space. have a think about that. So every cell has the full set of instructions for every protein. So your eye cell knows how to make liver tissue, and your
Yeah.
skin cell knows how to make insulin. It doesn't do it, hopefully, but it knows how to in its DNA. But it does. But it doesn't know. It doesn't know, like, if I'm an embryo, it doesn't know, like, oh, okay, we've gotten to the elbow, now we need to start making the forearm, right?
Right.
Or we have a liver here, we should make it this shape and it should only be so big. That is not in the DNA. And so there's a team of researchers who are very, very clever over at Tufts University who are doing tons of amazing research on biophysics, on the mechanics, because it seems that it's mechanical, probably and electrical, but mechanical signals that let the different compartments of the body know where they are, when to stop growing, how to regenerate, and that's what they are describing a model that is very similar to what we understand. And so those pathways, I think, are going to be very important for distal needling.
Okay. I think I was watching one of your previous presentations where you mentioned briefly that there's a certain type of people that acupuncture does work on, and for some people that don't, they don't have a certain type of substance in the body. What was that?
Yes. So that was interesting. So that was research on the role of opioids, of endogenous opioids in the body, and endorphins. So the word endorphin means like endogenous morphine. And so one of the ways that they were demonstrating that role is that what I want to say is that one thing that I really love about biochemistry is that it's all yin yang. Like yin yang theory, you can't, once you've learned that first and then you do biochemistry, it's impossible to unsee it. And it's for everything. It's for relative amounts of chemicals. It's for the relationship between the chemicals in the body and the receptors for them, and how that mutual conversion is always happening, and the seed of one is in the other. It's incredible. But in the body, one of those balances is a certain endorphin and something called CCK8, which is cholecystokinin 8. And so it's been known for quite a long time that CCK8 can block the effects of morphine and endorphins. And so what they had found was that folks who, well, when I say folks, I think I probably mean mice. So when they found that in mice that had high levels of CCK8, that the acupuncture analgesia was not nearly as effective. And then furthermore, when they administered something that helped them to break down and lower their levels of CCK8, they turned them from non-responders into responders.
Oh, so you lower the levels of CCK and then they become...
Yeah, and this is all experimental. So I mean,
right.
I'm not saying like I prescribe some sort of supplement for lowering CCK8. And also because that kind of goes back to what we understand is that you don't want to, unless it's an emergency or extreme, you don't want to be tinkering so much with these individual substances, because they balance each other out, and the body's really intelligent. It's going to find another way. Whereas what we're doing is we're introducing a stimulus that helps the body do it itself. And that's going to, I would say, almost always be, better. In the long run.
Okay, so you wouldn't suggest lower the CCK and then go get acupuncture?
Yeah. Just lower the CCK, get acupuncture. You'll be cool. Yeah.
Okay. I think one of the main things, like when I look at the acupuncture research, is every study I see that has positive effects for acupuncture, it's always from a Chinese study. And like even myself, the skeptical side is like, oh, there's a Chinese study. Of course you're gonna have 1,000 people. Of course you're gonna say that. Like, Chinese. I lived in China for 8 years, and it's like, of course they're gonna play with numbers. I know what's up. So how much quality research would you say is actually coming from Asia? Because the main argument against these studies, well, it's from an Asian study. Of course they're gonna be biased.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's what kind of keeps popping up again and again. And this is again where the sort of the argumentation bit comes back rather than what's really going on. My response to that, I can see that there's evidence of publication bias, which is where they're only going to publish positive studies. I can see evidence of doctoring and making up stuff. What I observed, though, is that that's not unique to China.
That's true.
That's
Yeah.
happening
A
everywhere.
big pharma, I'm
And
sure. Yeah.
Big pharma, again, well documented how they affect the results of their studies. And so what we're seeing is not a Chinese research problem; it's a global medical scientific research
Mm.
problem. So my response to people who point that out is, I have yet to see a rigorous study comparing the bias between China and other countries, which is, if you were being unbiased about it, that's what you would
Yeah.
do. So you can't. A new proposed NICE guideline came out like yesterday that has thrown out acupuncture because most of the research was from China. Now, research that's been done in the West has shown that over half of published studies that come out have incorrect conclusions, incorrect results. So that's worse than a coin toss. So what my point would be, well, if you're going to throw out the Chinese studies, you got to throw them out, all of them out. So
Throw all
you
them
look
out.
like
Yeah, yeah. It's a good
you're just
logic.
a little bit confused by that. Yeah, yeah. I just so I think. I think I think people are enjoying picking on China, and then they can just
Yeah.
invalidate all of that research. And I'm not saying, I'm not saying that research is pristine, but I'm saying we need to be consistent.
Yeah, I think you're right. Back to your point about if someone has already made a decision, hey, I don't think acupuncture works, to just kind of use all kinds of logic to support that. And oh wow, that actually makes a lot of sense. That's actually yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of information on the bias in research in the so-called West, or in the English-speaking world, the European world, which is also helpful for us to have in our arsenal. Again, I'm not. It's not my goal that I give people the tools to just be, assholes to everyone and
Yeah.
start arguing with them. But it's helpful for us to know this because, there's a lot of myths that are being repeated over and over again. So the research on the problems with research is very robust. So,
Right.
first, industry funding affects outcomes.
Mm.
So what I mean by that is that if a pharmaceutical company is paying for their own research, it's more likely to be positive and to minimize the side effects. And the second thing is that most medical research is industry funded. So, there's no conspiracy theory here. This is
Yeah.
just human nature, and
Yeah.
this is just the nature of systems. So we want to be aware of that. And so in some ways with acupuncture, there's no windfall profit to be gained from acupuncture. Nobody can
Right.
patent it,
Yeah.
So the research, I'm not saying that gives it a free pass. I'm saying that, okay, well, that's just one source of bias that we don't really have as an industry. So we can point that out.
Yeah, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, but speaking of evidence, how close are we to saying, hey, scientific proof is out there? Because I keep seeing so many mixed messages all across the interwebs, and it's like, okay, evidence is here, new breakthrough, evidence here, acupuncture meridians exist, and then the week after that, you'll see like NICE guidelines refuted acupuncture, and then the week after, okay, evidence is here again. Like, I mean, how close are we, or would you say we're already there? It's just not mainstream yet.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't know if this answer is going to be unsatisfactory for people, but I mean, I think this is all about storytelling. People
Mm.
want like hard proof. It's like I look at it as storytelling, and I think I'm trying to come up with a more empowering story. And once we
Right.
can get that story out there, then actually we'll see the tides shift. And the reason why I say that is because the clinical evidence for acupuncture is so good. It's so strong, and compared to so many mainstream treatments, it's what we have is something that is so effective and so safe. So that's already happened, and yet we don't have this widespread. Well, we have good support, but it's just it's at that tipping point. So the question
Right.
is why, and so that why bit, that what I've observed and what I think the answer to that is storytelling. And specifically it's that we as a profession, including the researchers, have been using a model to explain how it's working that's not been scientifically validated yet. Okay, so I'm reading a randomized controlled trial, and in the introductory paragraph they are talking about chi in meridians and channels. So I find that problematic
Mm.
9 times out of 10, because it goes back to what your purpose is. If your purpose is to do research to improve the validity of what we're doing, and you're talking about a model that's not been scientifically validated, you've just immediately shot yourself in the foot. which is why I'm focusing so much on mechanisms and biochemical models, not because I think that's the end all be all, and not because I think we have to explain our medicine that way, or not for any of these other kind of more narrow reasons. It's simply because I think that that's like the biggest single thing that is holding acupuncture back from widespread acceptance. I mean, you have studies. I mean, there was a study done, I think it was in Tunisia in the A&E last year. It was in the emergency department in the A&E, patients coming in acute pain. They were randomized to morphine drip or acupuncture.
Oh, wow.
Acupuncture outperformed morphine drip.
I
Okay,
believe that.
Right. So acupuncture had, I think the morphine drip had something like a 78% effectiveness, where effectiveness was like a 50% reduction in your pain. And acupuncture had a 92% reduction, 92% effectiveness. And it worked more quickly and it had fewer side effects. Okay. Now, and then you have science-based medicine who writes about this and say it's placebo. So,
It's crazy.
I mean, now, and what made me laugh about that is that I'm an acupuncturist and acupuncture researcher, but I've got to be honest with you, I would have a stronger placebo effect from the morphine drip. Okay, like full disclosure, that would be more convincing to the subconscious for me than the needles. So how did that still happen? Well, that still happens because we're talking about something that sounds like we're saying that an invisible life force energy is being moved in the body, and that's why this is still happening. So I'm not advocating that the profession discard its models. Keep them, use them. They're clinically helpful and relevant, and perhaps in the fullness of time, they will get that objective scientific validation across the board. Or it doesn't matter. It's not important. But I think what is important is that we use language to explain how it is what we do, so that the clinical research can be accepted.
Oh, okay. What is your passion project at the moment?
I think that's evidence-based acupuncture. So evidence-based acupuncture it's a website. It's an organization. It was set up by Dr. Bartosz, who I always say he's given me permission not to attempt his surname. He's Polish MD, an amazing human being, and he's fully retrained in Chinese medicine. And he really saw this need to communicate acupuncture's evidence using the language of science and biomedicine for his patients and for other medical colleagues. And so he set this up completely his own time and his own resources. And it was just something that was difficult to sustain past that initial starting point. And so not too long ago, he asked me to take it over. And this is, I think in one way or another, I've had ideas about having this platform to create this content with a team of people for years. And so it's going, and with this project, I'm shooting for the stars. So, this is going to be, a highly accessed, beautiful, award-winning website that's super useful, helpful, and constantly evolving. And, immediately people from all over the world have, decided to join in and participate. And it's incredible. So we've got some of that first content coming out, and it's beautiful, awesome. It's gorgeous, and it's helpful. So I'm really, really excited about that.
That's awesome. So what can other acupuncturists across the world, or whoever's listening, what can we do to help that? Like, what can we do to promote the status of acupuncture? Is anything that everyone can contribute and do?
To promote the status of acupuncture, I mean, I think it is ultimately about communication, about good communication, and evidence-based acupuncture really, I hope, is going to just make that so much easier and also hopefully enjoyable. And some of that communication, for the context that most of us are operating in, will be to be able to explain what we do using the conventional model. Again, not because there's anything wrong with our model, but because we are in that context. The analogy I've made before is like, if I were going to go on holiday in Japan, I could decide to learn some Japanese phrases or not. It'd be up to me. And if I wanted to be able to communicate better while I was there, then that's what I would do, or I could just keep speaking English and complain, So it's that sort of thing. So that is one thing that we can do, and also I think that that's just about if if we can internalize the confidence of knowing that what we do is backed up by so much good research, then that just, I think that increases the satisfaction of what we do, which means that we are more helpful to our patients, that we avoid burnout, and that we can help more people for longer. And that's really ultimately what it's about. It's about enjoying what we do and helping improve the quality of lives of our patients. So yes, just stay hungry, stay curious,
Stay
and
hungry,
stay
stay
open-minded.
curious. That's
Yeah.
good, solid advice. So with evidence-based acupuncture, is that going to be more of like a place for resources people acus can go to look up research and new articles and what's going on in the industry in terms of what's going on?
Yeah, the current vision for it, and I'm sure it'll evolve over time, is one that we're in the process of creating a series of short evidence summaries on acupuncture for different clinical conditions. And so we're using the 46 clinical conditions that were identified in John McDonald's evidence project. And so it's really straightforward. It's an introduction to the condition, the clinical evidence for acupuncture, the evidence about how acupuncture is working, because we know that that's important for people to get that buy-in, and also a bit that I've pushed to add, which I think is also really important, is a comparison of acupuncture to the conventional treatments for that condition, because people are making a choice between different options. Right. And when we communicate, as acupuncturists and being immersed in our own world, like, we're like, oh, acupuncture. It's like, well, people are deciding whether they're going to do that or ibuprofen or antidepressants or surgery. I mean, and so if we're able to have an intelligent, evidence-based conversation about that, that's the other thing that so frequently gets left out when acupuncture is criticized, is any discussion about the evidence for the alternatives. And I think that, between the mechanisms and the comparisons, that is going to shoot us forward as a really, my intention is that acupuncture will be a first-line treatment where it's appropriate. And that's going to avoid so much pain and suffering and enhance the quality of life of so many people. Can you think of all of your patients who have been, through the system and have whatever they have for like years and years and years, and you get them so much better in like one session, and we're like, we're at a point where this is just not okay. And so, we need to keep doing what we're doing and see those patients and help them and support them. But on a system level, we need to communicate, in a convincing way that this is reasonable, and to offer this first. And if that doesn't help, because it doesn't always help, it's not always a solution, then to go for the more invasive treatments.
Yeah. What would you say if you're trying to get referrals from like your local GP or something like that? Like, like what is the best resource you would suggest to bring to, because they're very like research oriented. Okay, where's the evidence? What place would you suggest to go to say, here's the research, check it out? What do you think would be the best approach for that?
Well, it depends on your individual research personality. So, a lot of people listening are nerds as well. So, and most of them will know where to go. Go to Google Scholar, go to PubMed, go do some research. I'm hopeful that very shortly evidence-based acupuncture will be that resource. So, awesome. And also most doctors are not skeptics. Most doctors, they're clinicians. They got into medicine because they wanted to help people. They're very busy people. Not all of them have loads of time to read about research. And so, to be honest, for a lot of doctors, they will need very little convincing. So for a lot of them, they will be at a point of, I know some people have gotten better. I'm not sure if there's anything to it. I'm under the impression that they're under the impression there's no research on it and they're using qi. If you show them the smallest modicum of evidence, they go, well, actually, this systematic review of clinical trials have found blah, blah, blah. They'd be like, oh, shit, oh, okay, here. Because that's just not, that's the opposite of what they were told. And that is enough to shatter the belief. So I'm hopeful that evidence-based acupuncture very shortly will be that resource. We're going to do, as I said, the clinical summaries. We're also going to do some things on mechanisms and on models and how it works. And we're also going to discuss a little bit. I've got some things in edits from some amazing authors about medical models in the first place. That I imagine that some people, when they hear me, get a little bit nervous that I'm like, oh yeah, forget chi. And it's like, well, no, not forget chi, but actually we can come full circle and say, well, what is chi? What is Zhang Fu theory? And maybe can we explain that in a way that doesn't sound so crackpot? So we're going to have a little bit of that as well. And we're also going to have some economic effectiveness, which for hospital administrators and people who are making decisions about healthcare resources, this might be the only important part of the website as well.
Yeah, I noticed when you said, yeah, chi does sound kind of crackpot. Just in clinic earlier this evening, I mentioned, kidney as a Zhang Fu organ. The guy couldn't hold himself. He just he kind of cracked up to himself even. And I'm saying everyone's like that, but there are some patients that, But then I kind of switched and I said, oh, okay, well, your cortisol levels are really high. Let's try to level those up. And the compliance, the agreeableness just completely switched, and you can even see the glaze over his eyes. It was like, I think people just need to be talked to on a level that they understand. And I think in Asia, they can accept Qi and Zhang Fu, but not so much in the West.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really about meeting our patients where they're at, and also reflecting a little bit that before, if we are from a cultural context where these are foreign concepts, we need to also reflect that before we went to school, these were weird to us too, and that we were skeptical too. I mean, we needed some convincing. I was talking to a lot of colleagues recently who have a medical background or a Western background, and then they said for the first year of school, it was like they resisted it so much, so frustrating, because a lot of the models are not consistent as well. You have these. Is it yin yang, or is it substantive? But which one is it? Is that kind of Western thinking is very either or, and I understand that Chinese thinking is more like both, and that these things can exist in layers. And then after the first year, like something clicked for these people, and the same thing happened to me. And I went, oh, okay, it's okay. So I think if we can acknowledge our patient's skepticism and not get defensive and not look at it as a poor reflection, but just understand that actually that's kind of reasonable given where they're coming from. And if we can either use their language or explain our language, I do both, then we can improve rapport, improve outcomes, and also create advocates for what we do. I mean, I don't know about you, but I find that the patients who were my most vocal advocates were the most skeptical when they came in.
I completely agree. Same here. Yeah, same here. I completely agree. Just want to say thank you again so much for all your work. Just one last question. So if you had the ability to speak to every acupuncturist across the world in just 30 seconds, what would you say to them? What would you say? Oh gosh,
that's a very big question. I would say, that what we're doing, we have the best job in the world. I mean, we help people get better often when the story that they've been going through seemed like there wasn't a way forward. And just to enjoy, find ways to enjoy what you do as much as possible. The more you enjoy your work and your life, the more people you can help, and that can come in many ways. And it's really about staying curious. Master yourself first as well. If you find, I always find in clinic, if I notice myself giving the same advice a few times in a day, I realize that that's the advice that I need to hear. I'm like, oh, Mel, are you doing? Oh no, you're not doing that, and that is good advice. But things like that, or if you find certain patients that are pushing your buttons, enjoy that, and kind of get curious, go, oh, which buttons are those? And just enjoy the journey, enjoy the process, and just stay positive. I mean, what we do is so incredibly amazing, and while sometimes it can seem like a David and Goliath thing, I actually think we are operating in a really great context where because we're not so immersed in the dominant system, we just actually have a lot of freedom to set our own rules and to maybe do things better than they are being done, whatever better means. So just keep enjoying it. And remember why you started.
Completely agree. Thank you so much, Mel. I really enjoyed it. Thank you again for being here. Everyone that's listening, where can we find out more about what you do, and where can we find you?
Sure. So my place on the web is abetterwaytohealth.com, although that's a website that has not been updated for a little while. So need to kind of get on that. I'm on Facebook. My name, most ridiculous name, says Mel Hopper Koppelman. You can find me there. And then evidence-based acupuncture is one of my key projects. So if you can like us, follow us, share what we're putting out there, that really helps us, and only takes a second, and it is very empowering, positive stuff. And you can also come see us at our website, so that's evidencebasedacupuncture.org, and sign up for our email, which we will be sending when evidence summaries come out, so you'll know immediately.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much again, Mel. Look forward to the good stuff that's coming from evidence-based acupuncture. I look forward to just getting into an argument with someone, say, hey, check out this research, Mel's got my back. Thanks again, Mel. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
So that was my conversation with Mel Hopper Koppelman. Thanks again for tuning in, guys. So if you have any questions on research, you can hit her up. I've linked her websites up below. So if you enjoy this content or this podcast, or if you're watching this on YouTube, please share this, comment, leave a like. It really keeps me motivated to keep going.